Good morning, everyone. I'm Ariel Elliott, CEO of NOTUS. For those of you who are just learning about us, NOTUS is a nonpartisan newsroom with a bipartisan audience here in Washington, D.C. We cover Capitol Hill, the White House, and key federal agencies. Over the course of the next hour, we'll discuss the critical choices the Trump administration faces and the role of Congress in keeping our country safe from foreign threats in an era of international uncertainty and conflict on various fronts. The government shutdown makes this conversation even more urgent, as new questions have arisen about whether dysfunction in Washington puts our national security at risk if critical programs aren't funded and critical government employees aren't working. At a time when Republicans and Democrats are not talking to each other much on Capitol Hill, NOTUS is very proud to welcome a member from each party to our virtual stage for a bipartisan conversation. And both Congressman Don Bacon and Congressman Jason Crow are military veterans, so they are uniquely qualified to talk about this topic. We'll also talk with former Senator and Defense Secretary under President Obama, Chuck Hagel. He will react to President Trump's leadership approach and outline what he would be doing differently were he in the cabinet. We will leave the time at the end of each sessions for Q&A from the audience, so keep thinking of questions and you can put them in the chat. Before we get started, I would also like to thank our underwriter Issue One for supporting our live journalism at NOTUS, and I'm pleased to introduce Nick Penniman, Issue One's founder and CEO, for some framing remarks. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Ariel. It's great to see you and everyone here. Great to be working with NOTUS on this, and thank you so much for the congressmen who are coming to talk. Listen, there's no denying the moment that we're in. We're living in a time of great strain when the guardrails of our democracy are not as strong as many of us once believed. But the challenges we face today did not emerge overnight. They're not the fault of one man or one moment. For decades, Congress has failed to rein in executive overreach. Lawmakers of both parties have steadily ceded power to the presidency. Over time, the balance of power has tilted in ways that the founders warned us about, leaving us with an executive branch far more powerful than the Constitution ever envisioned. At Issue One, the organization I founded, our mission is to strengthen democracy by bringing people together across political divides. It's difficult work, especially today, but I believe that it's the only way through these times. We got to work together. And Americans are hungering to see each other as neighbors again and to do that. And that's the spirit with which we got to proceed. The hunger, by the way, is showing up in the polls. We recently worked with YouGov to poll voters about executive power, checks and balances, and the role of Congress. One of the most striking findings is that nearly 1 in every 3 voters ranked the concentration of power in the presidency as a top concern, just below inflation and roughly tied with jobs and immigration. And it's not just our fellow Americans who are paying attention to what's going on in this country and how it's being governed. The world is watching too. When we politicize our institutions here at home and tilt the balance of powers toward autocracy in the presidency, we send a dangerous message abroad. In a world where China and Russia are actively seeking to reshape international norms and disrupt domestic politics here in America, it's a message that can have a profound impact on the future of global affairs. That's why today's conversation matters so much. 2 members of Congress, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, and then another Republican after them, sitting down to engage, to listen, and to seek common ground. That's what Americans want to see, not shutdowns, not strife. And it's exactly what the founders intended, that even in times of deep division, we could debate, we could deliberate, honor each other's opinions, and ultimately align on the core principles that hold our republic together. Congress appears first in the Constitution, in Article 1 for a reason. The founders knew that the concentration of power in the hands of one person could lead to the kind of autocracy that they fought a revolution to end. They believed in a representative legislature, one full of conflicting ideas and personalities, but controlled by processes that lead to compromise. And they knew that that should be at the center of governing, not the presidency. We at Issue One are working with lawmakers from both parties to restore Congress's full constitutional authority, to bring our government back into balance. Our new reform package, which we rolled out on Constitution Day, is rooted in simple principles. Number 1, restoring Congress's trade and spending powers. Number 2, reinforcing oversight of emergency powers. And number 3, reestablishing the legislative branch's rightful role at the heart of our democracy. Unless we recommit to these constitutional principles, our government will drift further towards serving the interests of whoever is in the Oval Office and not the American people, which will then hinder the progress of our democracy, not just here, but also with our efforts abroad. Thank you so much for attending this important conversation. And with that, I will turn it back to NOTUS.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you all for being here. My name is Daniella Diaz, and I cover Congress for NOTUS, that's News of the United States, a nonpartisan newsroom. And I'm very excited to introduce our bipartisan panel. Amazing congressman that we're about to talk to. Congressman Jason Crow is a Democrat from Colorado, and Congressman Don Bacon is a Republican from Nebraska. They both serve together on the House Armed Services Committee, and they're both military veterans. So let's dive in. We only have a couple of minutes. Really don't want to take too much of your time. You're both very busy during this shutdown. Mentioning the shutdown, I've been on Capitol Hill every day covering this issue. And, given that it's been ongoing and the strain that it's been placing on defense operations and intelligence agencies, do you believe that the lapse in government funding is putting the U.S. National security at risk? And if so, who bears responsibility for that vulnerability? And we can begin with you, Congressman Crow, in that question.
Yeah, thank you, Daniella, and NOTUS and Issue One, and Nick Penniman. Nick's comments at the beginning here were absolutely spot on. We are in a moment right now where the checks and balances and the manner in which our Constitution was structured so that no one person or one party can consolidate all the power is vastly out of line right now. And you see that. I mean, that's the reason why we're in this position right now, is one side trying to roll over the other. And I look at this shutdown, which is a terrible travesty of governance, right? The fact that we have civil servants who have dedicated their lives to this country who are not being paid. We're on the verge of troops not being paid. All of which is happening in the context of us actually not even debating and voting in Washington, right? The majority has shut down the House of Representatives for weeks now. We are not in Washington doing that work, debating, voting. We deserve to be having that discussion. And that's my first call. You have to negotiate a resolution to this. Every single year I've been in Congress, there has been a bipartisan resolution to the appropriations bills, because I have always served in a narrow majority. It's always been either a narrow Democrat majority or a narrow Republican majority. And when you're in a narrow majority, the only way out of these situations is a bipartisan compromise. But the first step to that is talking and negotiating and debating, which has to happen. So yes, the longer this goes on, this does have national security implications. I mean, how can it not, when you have a situation where 300,000 civilian employees for the Department of Defense, these are the people that keep the grocery stores operating, that provide daycare for the children of our service members, that provide their dental care, their medical care, all the support services at these sprawling bases and facilities where our service members and their families live. Many of them are furloughed or working without pay. So the distraction to our service members is real and deep and will only get worse as time goes on.
Mr. Bacon, same question for you. How do you believe that the government shutdown is affecting national security, and who bears the responsibility for that?
Well, I do think over time it will have an impact if we stay closed for much longer than what we have right now. So I think in the short term, not a significant impact because most of our military is still working, but in the long term it would. And I would agree with my friend Jason that the appropriations process is supposed to be bipartisan, and it requires that. You need 60 votes to pass an appropriations bill in the Senate. And I really think that's where the Democrats should have focused, in my view. The continuing resolution, 99% of the Republicans voted for it. It's the same spending levels that we had under Joe Biden, and it's the same bill the Democrats voted for 13 times there. And I would say 98% of the Democrats voted against it. And so you need 60 votes in the Senate, right? So 3 Democrats have voted to keep government funded. The remaining 45 have not there. But I do think, to Jason's point, this really is about the appropriations bill that we're working on right now. And we have an opportunity to get some extension of the ACA tax credits in this appropriations bill. Most Republicans want some of it. We'd like to have income caps. We don't think somebody earning $600,000 should get the ACA COVID era tax credits, but we could maybe cap it at $150,000 or stagger it down from there. And we also would like to ensure the individuals are getting it, not the companies, the direct credit money. But this is something we can negotiate in the appropriations process. We got to have a compromise that enough Democrats will vote for. I really think this was the area that I would have recommended to Hakeem Jeffries and Leader Schumer, that they should have put their emphasis there on what they wanted to get, and versus a CR that they voted on 13 times, the identical CR. So I do think the bigger issue here is, and I empathize and put myself in other people's shoes. The President Trump has acted arbitrarily, whether it's rescissions, whether it's tariffs that he's put on without congressional support. I oppose the tariffs, by the way, and I think some of the Democrats are voting no because of the ACA tax credits, which we can easily fix in the appropriations bill. But I think a big chunk of this is just anger at the president. But what are you going to do? You can't keep the government shut down for 3 months or 3 years. I think they're going to have to work with this president. He won, and I've had to do the same thing. I don't always agree with the president, but I'm working my best to get him where I think he should be on Ukraine, tariffs, and so forth. So I think that just to close on this, where we got to get an agreement is in the appropriations bill. And the Democrats have the opportunity, if they don't like the final solution, to vote against the appropriations bill. And I think that's where the work should have been done here versus the CR.
If I may respond to Don, my friend Don, for a moment, Daniella. I love my friend Don, and I respect you greatly, but I think a lot of what you just said implies that this is situation normal, that we're in the same situation we've been in years past, but we're not in a more normal situation, right? What happened in July threatens to blow up the American healthcare system, double premiums for up to 25 million Americans, kick up to 13 million Americans off their healthcare. End up in rural hospital closures, in clinic closures, and healthcare groups going out of business. Those who were just barely staying afloat and without Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement money are going to go under, which is going to send shockwaves through our entire healthcare system, right? And that is what this is about. But also what this is about is a president who has been acting with impunity the last 9 months, who has ignored Congress, not showing up to briefings, not showing up to hearings, not responding to our letter requests, doing rescissions, deciding to spend money the way they want to spend money, regardless of very clear congressional intent, deciding to roll back important programs like the Baltic Security Initiative that my friend Don Bacon has led for many, many years as the co-chair of the Baltics Caucus, sending troops into American cities unlawfully without authorization. Strike after strike after strike without congressional authority or consultation. How in God's name would somebody expect us to send more money to this administration and give them a blank check if in the last 9 months all they have done is ignore Congress, ignore our authority, and spend money however they want to spend it, regardless of what the clear intent is? I'm not going to do it. Right? Unless there are guardrails in place, unless things change, and we have firm guarantees in writing that this presidency will start abiding by the intent of Congress and respecting the Article 1 branch, we can't continue like this is situation normal.
Well, pulling on that thread.
But to be clear, he's admitted
ahead,
this is the Democratic shutdown. They're shutting the government down because they're mad at President Trump. I don't think that's fair for the hundreds of thousands of employees. And we have an opportunity to pass some of what Jason wants in the appropriations bill itself, but to shut the government down, I mean, the other side's offered no way out of this other than a 3-year shutdown, because that's how long you're going to have President Trump left. And on the healthcare debate, I do think we have a Republican bill to extend the ACA tax credits, for example. There's grounds that we can work together on this. But on the reconciliation bill, 90% of the cuts or the savings in Medicaid are work requirements for able-bodied adults, healthy adults without children. And it's a requirement to work 20 hours a week or look for a job or volunteer or take classes 20 hours a week. 72% of Americans support this. So we got to be clear when we're talking about not supporting the Medicaid actions that were taken in the big, beautiful bill. It's really what they're targeting is the work requirements. And 3/4 of Americans support it. Back to you, Danielle. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I think this is a great thread to pull on, and I want to bring it back to foreign policy specifically. And I'm curious if you both could answer. We have about 10 more minutes before we go to audience questions, but I'm wondering what you each think, kind of pulling on what you're both saying. What responsibility does Congress have to strengthen democratic guardrails when these political norms are eroding?
We have
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Don.
Jason.
Yeah, go. Yeah.
I yield to you. I'll
Okay. We have every responsibility, right? Like there's no responsibility just to like fund whatever, right? And to pass whatever, right? Sometimes people will say, oh, we have to put the train back on the rails. Well, if the train tracks are heading to a bridge that has collapsed into a ravine, then why would we put the train back on the rails so it goes into the ravine, right? I must know that things are going to change, that this presidency is going to start following the law, is going to start respecting the Constitution, is going to start spending money in the way in which the United States Congress has said the money must be spent, right? I'm just simply not going to allow us to continue to be disregarded as the Article 1 branch. Because if we do that, if we just say, yes, we're going to make the short-term decision, we're going to roll and capitulate and just try to keep situation normal, A, as I've already articulated, the situation is not normal, and B, we will complete the gutting of the United States Congress. And I have an independent obligation to prevent that from happening. I'm a Democrat, I'm a proud Democrat, but I have time and time again in my time in Congress pushed back on my own party when it was necessary, right? I pushed back on the Biden administration on Afghanistan. I pushed back on the Biden administration on Ukraine. I pushed back on Joe Biden during the campaign season and pushed him to step down in the race. I have repeatedly pushed back when I felt like my oath and my obligation to the Constitution as a member of the United States Congress requires me to do so, regardless of my party affiliation. And now is no different. And that's why I implore my Republican colleagues to join with us in this effort to stand for the Congress and stand for the Constitution and to rebalance those checks and balances.
Congress obviously has a role to defend its Article 1 prerogatives. That's why I've been vocal on the tariffs. I think the Supreme Court's going to rule against the president on this because Article 1 is pretty clear that Congress has the authority of tariffs. For example, though the Congress has given him emergency powers, I don't think what he's doing is emergency powers. But so we do have areas that Congress should be speaking up and pushing back. Secondly, though, we do have a court system that does look out for the Article 1 authorities. And what we have found with the Supreme Court, for the most part, they have favored the president when it comes to firing individuals, but they have ruled against him for the most part, with a few exceptions, on if a bill has been passed, signed into law, that he has to spend that money. The only exceptions they've made is for foreign policy areas, which I disagree with, frankly. But my point is there is checks and balances going on. I think we should be more aggressive on the tariff side of this. And so I push back on the president as well. Probably the most vocal Republican in Congress right now on areas that I disagree with the president on. But I would have to come back to we do have elections. Elections are the ultimate guardrails. The American people, I don't think they overwhelmingly picked Trump this time, but it was a convincing win all the same back in last November, and also for a Republican House and a Republican Senate, maybe 51-49 spreads and all of that. Our Democrat colleagues are going to have to find ways to work with the president. We got 3 more years of doing this. We can't do a 3-year shutdown. And the right area to do this in is in the appropriations process versus forcing a government shutdown that we have right now. And most Americans realize it's the identical bill that was voted on 13 times now by both sides of the aisle, which I voted for 12 of the 13 times. So anyway, I yield back.
Yeah. And by the way, I got to give Don some credit here. He is one of the most vocal and independent members of Congress. There's no doubt about that, right? He is. There are so many instances where Don has stood up and was, one of the only, I think, members of the House to push on Pete Hegseth to resign, to do many things that I think were the right thing to do for the country. As a fellow service member, was the right thing to do, and I give him. I give him a lot of credit for that, which is why I'm here with you, Don, and why I'm always proud to have these debates.
I do think we have an issue where Congress has abdicated a lot of its authorities under Article 1. It hasn't just started with this president. I do think it's escalated under this president. But we had the same issues in the previous president with, for example, paying tuition, which, I thought even the president himself at one point said it was unconstitutional, and Speaker Pelosi, but he did it anyway. I just think each president has been escalating, and they're pushing the boundaries out. And I think both parties have often supported the president if it's their party. But that is traditionally, if you go back 250 years, Congress has normally protected its authorities, and we're not doing a good job of it right now. And I think both parties have abdicated this under presidents of their party. And it's gotten worse. I admit that.
Yeah, I think, Don is right. There are numerous ways in which this trend has been happening for a long time. Authorizations for use of military force, war powers. Congress basically gave a blank check to Bush in the early 2000s, and that hasn't been taken back, right? And Republican and Democrat presidents have used that, and in my view, abused that authority. And it's time for Congress to take it back. Immigration authorities, tariff authorities, all these things that are traditionally the purview of the Congress, it's important to take back.
Well, we just have a few more minutes, and I have one more question to ask you both before we open it up to the audience questions. I'm curious what you both thought of the Defense Department's decision to call 800 generals to Quantico last week.
I'll kick in. I was a general before I went to Congress. I didn't hear anything new. I know, I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I'm very focused on what the Secretary of Defense is saying. I say that because Congress hasn't changed the name to Secretary of War. I didn't hear anything new in there. This could have been easily done over email. It could have been done over virtual. I thought he was going to present the new military defense strategy or something like that, something epical, right? But it was just repeating what he has said during his confirmation process. I do think we should be focusing on being warriors, and physical fitness is an issue, but there's a lot more to being a general or an officer or in the military, enlisted or officer, and it starts with character. It starts with, resilience. There's more than just physical fitness. So I think in the end, it came across as condescending to 800 generals.
Yeah, I agree with Don, but I think it was a little bit more troubling to me. I think that display of pulling in 800 generals, first of all, it wasted tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money. That's important. Secondly, it pulled these generals who are working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks conducting operations around the world away from their posts and away from their missions, right? And that causes problems, right? Every time you ask them to do something different or extra, it pulls them away from the mission. Third, this is the type of display you would expect Putin or Xi to do, right? Pull people in a big room and a display of power and authority, right? This is not how we do things in the United States of America. We focus on merit, we focus on substance, we focus on people getting the job done, not displays of machismo and jingoistic rhetoric like you saw out of Pete Hegseth, right? And then just imagine being one of those officers who spent 30, 40 years in uniform, and Don is one of them, right? And you're a special forces officer, you have 15 combat deployments under your belt, you've seen your friends give their lives for this country, you've uprooted your family every 3 years for decades, you've given everything to this nation, and you have a National Guard major who's now the Secretary of Defense pound his chest and lecture you on not being fat and shaving effectively. I mean, it's horrible in its own right. But then you add on top of it the fact that Donald Trump got up there and talked about we talked about insurrection. He talked about going to war against American cities, and those generals might have to be prepared to do that. That is dangerous. It's dangerous rhetoric, and they're trying to normalize things that are un-American, that should not be happening. And I, for one, am not going to allow it to be normalized. We have to push back on this because this is not what our troops should be doing. They should not be pulled into politics. They should not be pulled into American cities. That they deserve better. This country deserves better. And that entire display was abhorrent in my view.
I have one audience question for the both of you. It's from someone watching who asks, can you assure us that the military will not obey unlawful orders? That is our biggest fear. Some will shoot or kill Americans.
Well, all of us give an oath to the Constitution, and I believe even if one general fails to follow it, there's enough leadership around us to know you can't do that. And I have a lot of faith in our military that they will follow only lawful orders. And where there's a breakdown with one person, they'll be called out by the other generals. And so I have faith in my brothers and sisters that are serving. And I do think that there's been a little bit of a tactic by this administration, which I've also called out. They fired, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. They fired the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and going to his retirement today. The Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Navy CNO. I do think there's a little bit of messaging to the leadership that, hey, we're in charge, you better listen to us. But even with that, I know the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he would not do an unlawful order. He's a good man. And even if wherever you have a breakdown, the others would fill in and say, no, we're not going to do that. So I have total confidence in our military and following the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, I share one part of what Don says here. There are incredible men and women. I know them well. They're people of character and integrity, and I'm less worried about those folks who are, 30, 40 years in, whose integrity and leadership and style has been well shaped and formed right now, than I am the message that's being sent to the lower ranks as they recruit new soldiers. They bring people in. They are very clearly trying to change the culture. And the structure of our military, starting at the lower ranks. And, I think, as a member of Congress that sits on the Armed Services Committee, and Don does too, we have an obligation not just to trust, but to ensure, right? My obligation is to make damn sure that the law and the Constitution is followed, which is, again, why I'm not acting like this is a normal time, because it's not. The things that are being said by President Trump are not normal. The things that they're doing to weaponize the DOJ are not normal. To indict their political opponents are not normal. Let's not forget that Donald Trump, listen, I'll always work with a president if that president is working in good faith, regardless of party. But it's Donald Trump that has called me an enemy of the state. It's Donald Trump that has said that you shouldn't work with Democrats. He actually said that. He went on a TV show and said, don't work with Democrats. We're going to do this alone, right? He's the one who said that, right? Not us. So, the burden is not on us to, quote unquote, work with them. He has to work in good faith and stop this rhetoric and stop these actions. So, yeah, I have a lot of confidence in our military commanders, but confidence is not enough because I swore an oath to build the military. Our Constitution says that the Congress builds the military. And then we also have to ensure that it's carried out in compliance with the Constitution. And that's, again, why I'm not acting like this is situation normal right now.
Thank you both for that answer for our audience question. I do have to wrap it up quickly, but I have one more question. If we could do a speed round for the two of you, trying to get as many questions as possible for this amount of time that we have together. I'm wondering if you both trust Trump's Israel-Hamas deal to hold, and what role do you believe Congress should play in enforcing this?
Well, the most important thing from my perspective is to get the 20 live hostages back and the 28 remains there. I think and I hope that happens Monday or Tuesday. To me, that's the most critical. These individuals have been starved, tortured, and their families have been heartbroken. I've met with many of them. So that is, to me, the most important thing. The second most important thing is Hamas cannot remain in power in Gaza. And I think that part is probably what I'm less confident that Hamas will follow through on this. Just to be candid, Hamas would rather be dead than have peace with Israel. And that's been my experience with them.
Yeah, I mean, I share what Don just said. In no order of priority, the issues are getting the hostages back, ending the fighting and the killing of civilians, and the starvation in Gaza, and we should include the West Bank in that too, and ensuring long-term and lasting security for the Israelis and the Palestinians, and that both sides have a right to exist, to be safe, and to live in dignity and in self-determination. And both sides need to have a secure state, and we need to figure out what that looks like for the Palestinians, because they must have self-determination in the state as well, just like Israel has the right to exist and the right to defend itself. So all of those things are important and must happen in short order. But do I trust Donald Trump? Hell no, I don't trust Donald Trump. Well, why would I, given what's happened, trust Donald Trump? Right? The man breaks deals on a whim, and the second he shakes his hand, it means nothing to him, right? Breaking a promise. So I'll never trust Donald Trump and those around him. That doesn't mean that I can't figure out ways to work with them if there are guarantees. If there are guarantees, and if I have guardrails, and if I have things in law that are enforceable, which is why we are pushing on the appropriations in the way we are, then we can figure out ways to move forward. But trust is not where we're at right now.
And how I wish I could pull on that thread even more, but unfortunately we're out of time. It has just been a pleasure to talk to the both of you. I wish I could do this all day. I don't know about y'all, but the back and forth was incredible. So we're going to leave it there. And now I'm going to turn things over to my friend and my colleague, Jasmine Wright, who will lead the next session. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Daniella. That was absolutely fascinating. I could have watched it all day, but we are moving on. Thanks, everyone, for being here, for staying with us. I am pleased to be joined by former Nebraska Senator and the 24th Secretary of Defense, Mr. Chuck Hagel. Hello.
Hello.
It is such a pleasure to talk with you today, and it couldn't come at a more important time because there is so much happening in the world, and I just want to jump right in and kind of pick up actually where the gentleman left off in the last session. I want to ask about news out of the Middle East. Last night, Israel's government approved phase 1 of the ceasefire plan negotiated by the Trump administration. This morning, they've partially withdrawn their forces to that initial line. Officials say now that the 72-hour clock for Hamas to release the hostages is ticking. Mr. Hagel, you said in April of last year that Israel's tactics towards Gaza were, quote, extremely disturbing, and that they do not serve the interests of Israel in the long term. Obviously, we know that you've had kind of a storied history with Israel. I wonder, for our first question, what do you make of the ceasefire, and what do you make specifically of Israel's willingness to approve a deal now?
Well, thank you for having me, and also I appreciated the two guests you had on before, both the congressmen who are good friends and great public servants and have been throughout their careers. As to your question, we'll see. We'll see where this goes. I mean, what's happened on both sides, and have this war be prolonged for over 2 years, where over 67,000 Palestinians have been killed, a third of those children, starting with the massacre, depravity of what Hamas perpetrated on Israel 2 years ago. No excuse for any of that. But I am hopeful, like we all are, that the first step in this process will begin and hostages released early next week. Build on that trust, build on that confidence that the next steps can be taken, so that there's some future, because that's what it's all about. I'm a believer in a two-state solution. Netanyahu has said he does not, as his cabinet has said that. But I think that's the only way for peace and for a future in the Middle East, because it's not just the Palestinians in Israel, it's the entire Middle East, and it drags in the United States and everybody else. So I'm hopeful that this will continue and the success of this begins early. Again, I'm hopeful next week with the release of the hostages, and we build.
I wonder what you make of Israel's willingness to approve a deal now, though. I mean, you just said that Netanyahu has been very vocal that he does not believe in a two-state solution. So how do you actually have a long-lasting peace without that?
Well, obviously the pressure put on Netanyahu by Trump, by the United States, by other countries, that cumulative pressure, I think, has put Mr. Netanyahu in a position where I don't think he's got any choice. He's isolated Israel in the world. You look at the United Nations, you look at the Arab nations, it doesn't make any difference where you go. Israel is isolated. And I think he understands that. And I think President Trump probably put it to him that way. This is what you're going to have to do. Now, that question is the real question. Once the real hostages are released, that phase one part of this long-term process, will Netanyahu follow through on the rest of it? We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, that leads me to a great point. I wanted to ask you, because President Trump supporters and even some critics in praising them at least getting to that first phase of that 20-point plan have basically said that no other modern president, including your former boss, former President Barack Obama, could have gotten this deal done. They cite things like his unconventional personality, his unconventional way of diplomacy, his ability to strong arm people into a deal as a reason why he alone could have gotten this done. As somebody who has worked for another president, Mr. Hagel, I wonder if you believe that is true.
Well, I think all those pieces are in play here, but also the timing. I mean, you go back to past presidents, other than Biden, who was president when this Hamas incursion occurred. You've never seen quite like what has happened under other presidents or at the time of other presidents. So the timing on this is one thing. The other dynamics that you mentioned, Trump style, certainly is another. But in world affairs, like in anything in life, timing is critical. Yeah. Timing to be able to do something that you could not maybe have been able to do 10 years ago or 5 years ago. That's not everything, but it's a big part of it. And timing here is important because, as I said, Israel has been isolated in the world community. And even within Israel and the protests inside Israel against the government, against Netanyahu, to stop this war and bring the hostages home, is all part of the building of that process that results in the timing being the right time to move.
Do you think the previous administration took too long in trying to pressure Netanyahu to get to this result? Or is that just a facet of the timing in which the consensus wasn't the same back then as it was now?
Well, I think the consensus has always been essentially the same, but again, the building of pressure on Netanyahu and the Israeli government to act, it's taken some time, and I understand that. And again, it's not just this situation. You look at history. You look at the last 100 years. You look at the last 80 years since World War II. That's always a factor in these situations. But I think in this situation of communications of modern day, of the history since 1948, of the establishment of Israel and the promise of a two-state solution and all that's happened since then, that's built into this as well.
Yeah. Well, speaking of timing, I wonder, the Nobel Peace Prize was announced today. Donald Trump did not get it. Obviously, he's been openly campaigning about it, wanting to have it. I wonder if you believe that he deserves one.
Well, that's not for me to say anyway. That's for the Nobel Peace Prize people. I mean, you look at all the people who would be nominated, who are nominated, the people have had an influence in the world. Sure, he could be considered, but that's their decision.
Yeah.
The Nobel Peace Prize Committee.
Awesome. To take this conversation a bit more broadly outside of just Israel, shortly after the presidential election in November, you wrote an op-ed for the New York Times where you said, political independence and ethics are the bedrock of our military. Today, I am concerned that both are in danger. Almost a year later now, and so much has happened on the foreign policy stage. Obviously, the strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, the drone strikes on boats in the Caribbean Sea, the deployment of the National Guard into U.S. cities, in some case against the will of the local government there. I wonder how you would rate your level of concern now.
Well, I think level of concern now is higher than when I wrote that article, that op-ed, the New York Times back in late November, for the obvious reasons, and you just mentioned some of them. But the guests on before me ended their conversation with a discussion about what just happened a week ago here in Washington, with the president and the Secretary of Defense calling over 800 admirals and generals to Washington for what? That was clearly a politicization of the military. The president and the secretary essentially saying, you will do what we tell you to do or we'll fire you. I mean, there wasn't any other way to interpret that. It was plainly stated. They've already done that in over 100 cases, starting with the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being fired. Don Bacon mentioned some of those people by name. So I'm more concerned than I've ever been. And both the congressmen commented exactly right, in my opinion. Both of them are veterans and understand what you do to a military when you politicize it. When people join the military, it's not to join a political party. You take an oath of office to, as Don Bacon said, to the Constitution, not to a president, not to a Secretary of Defense, not to a political party, but to the country, to defend the country. It's not a Department of War. It's a Department of Defense. You defend America. If you go to war in order to do that, you go to war. We've done that. But it's bigger than that. It's about skill sets. It's not about push-ups, how many push-ups you can do. It's skill sets, but more importantly, it's character. That is the bedrock of everything, character. And you want military people who are, first of all, professional, obviously, at every level, but you want people who have character and care about the country. So I'm more concerned today about the politicization of our military than when I wrote that op-ed.
Yeah, I want to come back to that point, but there's something that the congressman in the last session mentioned that you just touched on, which is the powers that Congress has. You were obviously a senator for more than a decade. I wonder how you see the role of Congress in authorizing the military force as it stands today. Do you believe that Congress has ceded some of its authority to the executive branch? I mean, you can take obviously the boats, the drone strikes on the boats in the Caribbean Sea, and Congress members questioning what the evidence for that is. They weren't clearly giving any oversight. I mean, I wonder what you make of that question of whether or not Congress is actually holding on to the authority in which they are given by these different laws and vehicles.
I do believe that the Congress has not fulfilled its constitutional role in Article 1 of the Constitution. When you read that article, and by the way, I would occasionally take the floor of the Senate during the debate on Iraq, whether we should go into Iraq. And when I was told by some of my Republican colleagues in debates that that's a presidential decision, that's not a congressional decision, I would read Article 1, parts of Article 1, on the floor of the Senate in a speech that talks about the responsibilities of Congress for our armed forces, for foreign policy, starting with appropriations. The President of the United States doesn't appropriate any money. He doesn't have any money. It's the Congress where it starts with everything, with authorization of committees, of authorizations of the government and the people. So yes, I think Congress has abdicated its responsibility in many, many ways to the president on these issues.
What do you think the reasoning is for that? Do you think it is just that the executive branch, including Russell Voten, OMB, or Donald Trump himself, just basically keeping Congress in some ways at kind of arm's length, or do you think that it is an active regression by, say, the Republican Party?
Well, I think the Republican Party today is so much a tool of whatever this Republican President Trump, wants them to do. I've never seen anything like it in my time in Washington, either a Democratic president or a Republican president. Every president is going to push, of course, for his policies and using his party and the politics of that as part of that strength, of course. But I've never seen anything like this president and how this party has just essentially knelt to him. Don Bacon every now and then pushes back, but very few Republicans push back. And that's very dangerous because you go to Congress first as an American, not as a Republican, not as a Democrat. You take an oath of office. You don't take an oath of office to a political party or a president, but to this country. Sure, you run as a Republican or Democrat or independent. I get all that. But ultimately, in every vote you make, every position you take should be in the interest of the people you represent, Democrats, Republicans, and Americans. And I think the majority of the Republican Party, and by the way, I'm still a Republican, they have failed on so much of this. And I hope they find some new courage, and I think they will, because I think this president, if he keeps going in the direction he's going with an authoritarian bent, is going to force some of these Republicans to stand up and push back. And I hope they will.
Who in the party, in the Senate or in the House? Obviously, we heard from Don Bacon just a few minutes ago, but who in the party do you think is primed to make that stand right now?
Well, I'm not going to get into the names, but there will be, I hope, I believe, some Republicans in both the House and the Senate that will start to stand up, that will start to push back and say, this is not in the interest of our country, whatever the issue is. And it'll take courage to do that. I get that. I understand politics. I understand the strength of MAGA and the president. But I used to tell some of my colleagues, you're defined not by the title you hold, but you're defined by who you are. And you should always remember that. You know, Chuck Hagel's Chuck Hagel, and he's going to be that way and until he dies. Chuck Hagel is not a former Secretary of Defense or a United States Senator, as by definition. Yeah, he did those things, but you got to remember, you are who you are, and that's how you're going to be remembered, and you should never forget that. And I think sometimes we in politics get consumed with our titles and the present and don't remember what I've just said.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you talked about of politicizing of the Department of Defense. How would you grade the current Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's performance right now? Obviously, you have sat in that very honorable role. I wonder what you would say, and I wonder, do you have any relationship with him? Have you offered him any help in his tenure? Kind of go into all those details for us.
Well, I don't know him. I've never met him. He's, I mean, obviously, if he would reach out to me, I mean, other secretaries have. I've reached out to former secretaries when I became a secretary. I knew some of them. In fact, I knew all of them. I used to have some of them in for lunch, and so it was not unusual for me to call them and talk with them. And I sought their advice. I think any of us who had those jobs and know how tough they are, if anybody, it doesn't make any difference, Republican, Democrat, if they call and ask for advice, you're going to help them. Of course you are. I've never heard from him, and I don't know him. I think what I've seen and what he's done over there, I would completely disagree with. Starting with what we just talked about a few minutes ago and what happened in Quantico this week, a few days ago. I mean, you can't treat people that way, but you especially cannot treat professional, nonpartisan military the way they have been treated. Just arbitrarily firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, making these wild assumptions, pronunciations that, well, you're all where you are because of your color, or because you are a woman, or because you are a product of DEI or wokeism, which he's taken an axe to that at the Pentagon. And by the way, I don't believe that any of that is true. I mean, I saw how people were promoted at the Pentagon, women, minorities, others. They were promoted on their experience, on their capability, on the job they've done, on who they are. So I would disagree with Hegseth on almost everything I've seen, but most importantly, how you deal with the people over there and the professionals who devoted their lives to defending this country.
Yeah. A quick follow-up, and then I'm going to get to an audience question. But I mean, in that speech, and I think over the last 10 months, Hegseth's position has been it was the prior administrations, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, that, in his view, weakened the military, allowed wokeism to come in and derail the ability for the military to be at its best. I know you say you disagree with that, but I wonder, these are attacks on the work that you did, in addition to other folks as DOD. I wonder if you find that helpful to the military, even if you don't find that to be true.
Our military is the most lethal, the most professional, the most skilled military in the history of man. Anyone who tells you that it's not lethal enough because you're too fat, because you can't do enough pull-ups and push-ups, or because you're a woman. And women just unfortunately can't compete with men in physical activity. Any saying of any of that is just not true. When you're in the professional military, yes, physical fitness is important. Of course it is. But it's skill sets. As I said before, it's character. It's all these different dynamics, how you use technology, how you use artificial intelligence, how you lead, how do you get along with others. I mean, 20 skill sets that go into this. And I don't think anyone's administration, whether Republican or Democrats in the past, have weakened our military. I think our military has been strengthened year after year after year, and it's been strengthened because of good people, because of leadership, because of the example of the kind of leaders that we've had, fortunately, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but all across the board. And as we have promoted minorities, as we've seen women rise to the CNO of the Navy, head of the Coast Guard, that's been based on skill sets. And so our military today is more diverse, it's stronger, it's smarter, it's more skilled, more lethal than it's ever been.
Yeah. Let me turn to an audience question for somebody who is watching. They say, how likely do you think it is that President Trump will invoke the Insurrection Act to quell protest in U.S. cities? If this happens, what do you think the military community and democracy advocates should say in response? And I'd add, should do in response.
Well, I hope the president does not move toward using the Insurrection Act. I mean, other presidents, as you know, have used it in specific cases. But what we've seen so far in how he's used the National Guard going into Los Angeles to start with, Portland, Memphis, what he says about Chicago, he says things that are not true. The cities are burning, is out of control. The military's role is not law enforcement. There are times, and I think appropriately so, when Eisenhower used the National Guard, when LBJ used the National Guard, George H.W. Bush in 1992 used the National Guard for very specific reasons. But we don't have those reasons today. In my opinion, none of those cities should have seen any deployment of National Guard. If he uses the Insurrection Act, I think the Congress needs to push back hard on that. It'll go to the courts, like so much of this is doing and is going, and where it'll eventually wind up. But it would be wrong, and I think it just divides this country even more if he does that, puts the military in even more of a difficult position. These men and women that are sent in to do these things that constitutionally, not only are they not equipped for, but they shouldn't be used for.
Yeah. Okay, we are coming close to our time, so I want to ask you two questions, kind of lightning round. Where do you think the U.S. stands in the global world order today?
Well, the biggest concern I have is the dismantling of the world order. If you see the dismantling of the world order, and that world order was built on common interests, rule of law, freedom of navigation, free trade, collective security. You see that, which I think we are seeing, that breakdown. You will see a very dangerous world. You will see the world fragment. And our alliances, our allies, our partners will no longer be there. The reason that we can project power in the world today, very much the reason, is because of our allies, because of our partners. And we start breaking that down, we're going to have a lot of trouble, because China will use that. Authoritarian governments will use that. Russia will play a game with China, as they already are, North Korea. And it'll make it a far more dangerous world than we've ever seen since World War II.
So if I asked you what's keeping you up at night, you would say where the U.S. stands in the world order, or something else?
Well, I would say yes, the world order. The reason I say that, because with all the other problems, specific problems, and we've discussed some of them, everything's interconnected. Not one of these issues is separate. Ukraine, we haven't even talked about Ukraine. The
Yeah.
consequences of Ukraine, that's going to affect everybody in the world, how that comes out. The Middle East, Gaza, how that comes out is going to affect all the world, starting with the United States. Tariffs, all that's going on, artificial intelligence, technology, especially technology without humanity, so dangerous. So yeah, if there was just one thing, I would say the dismantling of the world order, because everything is included in that.
My last question before I let you go is what type of weaponry would you be sending to Ukraine right now?
Well, I think we need to let Ukraine use sophisticated weaponry in order to fight back. I mean, when you think of it, it's ridiculous. Here is Mr. Putin, who started the war, who invaded another country. First time it's happened since World War II in Europe. And yet he's dictating the terms of the conduct of the war. I'm Mr. Putin, I invade, and I want to conquer your country, but I'm also telling all the allies of Ukraine, this is what you can do and what you can't do. These are the weapons you can use and what you can't use. I think we need to let the Ukrainians use sophisticated weapons that can reach into Russia and do some real damage to Russia, because if we don't do that, then ultimately Ukraine will lose the war. That's what's going to happen. If that happens, then the consequences of Russia winning that war and the consequences of how Ukraine and the rest of of Europe is going to have to deal with that. It's going to affect how China sees Taiwan. It's going to affect everything, and it'll affect all those Eastern European border countries that once were under the sway of the Soviet Union, the Baltic countries right down that border.
Okay, Secretary. Like Daniella said, I could go on forever and ever. Your insights have been absolutely invaluable today. I thank you so much for your time, but we're going to have to leave it there. That concludes our program. My name is Jasmine Wright. I am Notice's White House correspondent and co-author of the Notice newsletter. I hope you guys are already signed up. If you're not, go to the website, put in your email. It's free and it comes to your inbox every morning. And I just want to thank you guys so much for spending your morning with us and for all the time that you've given us. And I hope that you've learned something. Thank you.
Thank you.